Hi, I'm Sayurite Bulletin. In this video I'm gonna explain how Dios Valen or Holy Selection works, cause a pretty recurrent theme when some fans of Bleach talk about some aspects of the story that are considered incoherent or badly explained, Dios Valen is touched upon rather frequently. So, if you have any doubts about how the Holy Selection works, don't worry. In this video I'll explain every nuance about it. Let's start with the video. Alright, first we're gonna see what definition of Dios Valen I'm gonna use. I've checked two translations and the original text, and I found out that the Japanese and Spanish versions are more similar and concrete to each other than the English one. At least the English translation that I could read online, of course. So, in this video I'm gonna use the Spanish explanation, cause it's the most accurate to the Japanese one. Now, knowing this, let's see what Dios Valen is and how it works. The Holy Selection or Dios Valen is an ability possessed by Yhwach, and it's derived from his innate ability of sharing his soul with his environment, to later claim those fragments of his soul and thus acquire power. So, the Holy Selection consists in collecting life and strength from all the Quincy's that are considered unnecessary, to distribute those as Yhwach pleases in the form of energy. For example, to revive and make their allies stronger, as we see in the Royal Palace when the Imperial Guard or Shustofel is killed by the Zero Squad, or to absorb this energy for himself, which leads Yhwach to collect energy to restore all of his powers after being sealed a millennium ago, or just take this power to increase her own. Now, when Dios Valen actives, works as follows. First, pillars of light appear in all places where a Quincy who will be victim of this selection is found, and those lights land on the Quincy's immediately, thus consuming their life and strength in the form of energy, and this energy is redistributed as Yhwach pleases. So the Quincy's who got hit by the light not only lost their energy, they also started to develop a silver cloud in their hearts. And that cloud is going to provoke an early death to those Quincy's if they didn't die due to this loss of energy when they were hit by the light. But there's even another inconvenience, and that is the fact that due to this loss of energy, the Quincy's lose their ability to use ball standing. That happens because Dios Valen collects the strength of the Quincy's, and the strength of a Quincy resides in his power, therefore in his ability to absorb spirit particles. This conclusion can be interpreted from a dialogue by Quilgiopi, when he is up to show the power of his ball standing. And also by Urahara, when he explains to us what is the technique that Uryu used back in the Soul Society to explain what is a ball standing. This technique Uryu used in the Soul Society is called Quincy Let's Steal, or Quincy Final Form, and it allows Quincy to reach his full potential. To cast this technique, the Quincy has to train with the Sunray Glove, an artifact with the ability to disperse spirit particles. Therefore, this glove acts as a form of restraint for a Quincy, whose power comes from absorbing spirit particles. And that's why, when Uryu retires the restriction of this glove, he can absorb spirit particles to such a level that he accomplishes to absorb some physical parts of the Sayurite, reaching at this point the maximum potential of his power and thus his strength, but this happens in exchange for losing all of his strength and therefore his power as a Quincy. And this power, at the end of the day, it's his ability to absorb spirit particles. So, the Quincy Ball Standing or Quincy Holy Form, in essence is the same as the Quincy Let's Steal, but this new technique is the result of the evolution of the current Quincy, drawing on the vestiges of the now obsolete Quincy Let's Steal, and this new Quincy Let's Steal allows a Quincy to reach his maximum potential without losing his powers as a Quincy. Therefore, if the Holy Selection collects the strength and thus his powers as a Quincy of absorbing spirit particles, it makes sense why a Quincy loses his ability to use ball standing. But losing this power doesn't mean a Quincy is gonna completely lose his ability to absorb spirit particles, cause Buzz B is able to cast his bow and shoot arrows in his battle against Jugram. So, we have to understand the fact that losing strength or power due to the Holy Selection doesn't necessarily imply the Quincies are gonna completely lose their ability to absorb spirit particles or Reishi, and what actually happens is a drastic decrease in their ability to absorb Reishi, to the point of not being able to absorb the required amount of Reishi to use a ball standing, and only being able to cast bows and arrows. That example applies to the Sten Ritter or a Quincy with the ability to absorb large amounts of Reishi. But if we apply this logic to an ordinary Quincy who only has the ability to absorb spirit particles to cast a bow and arrows, he wouldn't even be able to cast any bows or arrows when the Holy Selection steals his strength or power. Now, in those instances where some Quincies evade the light, they lose their ball standing as well. So we can assume that even if the light didn't hit them, they lose life and their strength anyway. And also, if we pay attention to the number of pillars of light that rise from the bottom ground all the way to the Royal Palace, we can see that those coincide with the number of Quincies that were victims of Deus Valen at that moment in time, making visual confirmation of the fact that those Quincy who dodge the light lose life and their strength as well. The only difference when dodging the light could be that those Quincy may not develop any silver cloth in his heart, cause in the novel Can't Fear Your Own World, we can see how some Quincies who dodge the light are still alive even after passing 3 years since the Quincy War ended, but in the novel this topic is never touched upon. So maybe what could have happened is that this silver cloth ceased his development thanks to Yhwach's death. Alright, taking all that we have seen till now, we're gonna see what are the two most generalized inconsistencies about Deus Valen. The first one is why some Sten Ritters didn't die when the light hit them. And the second one is why the Quincies who are victims of the Holy Selection didn't lose their shrifts or holy letters. We're gonna start with the second one first. The reason why the Sten Ritter retained their shrift after being victims of Deus Valen is cause this one collects life and strength, and a shrift is acquired via drinking a small portion of Yhwach's blood, and thanks to this method, the shrift remains embedded in their souls. And how this power will end up being is determined by a Quincy's own experiences throughout his life, and not only by the fact of being a Quincy, like the ability of absorbing spirit particles, which is what gives strength and power to a Quincy. Therefore, the strength or power collected by the Holy Selection is the one that Quincy possesses by the fact of being a Quincy. That's why they won't lose their shrift until they die. And when they die, this small embedded portion of Yhwach's soul returns immediately to Yhwach, thus prolonging the cycle he is condemned to live, sharing his soul with his environment and receiving knowledge and power every time those shared fragments of his soul return to him. All of this to avoid reversing this same process, because if he stops absorbing souls via this method, he will return to his primitive state, which implies being blind, deaf, mute, and immobile. The other inconsistency was due to the fact that some Quincy didn't die after being hit directly by the light. In the story, Kubo says to us that all the Quincies who lose this life and strength in the form of energy will perish. And that's a correct statement, cause all the Quincy who are victims of the Holy Selection suffer an early death without any exception. Doesn't matter if this early death takes place after being hit by the light, or it happens shortly after the Quincy starts to develop the silver cloth. However, as we have seen thanks to Ryu, a Quincy won't die just by losing their powers. Therefore, the fact that determines if the Quincy is going to immediately die or not after being hit by the light is the life stolen by Deus Valen. and that explains why the most elderly characters perish immediately, like Roberta Coutron, and also explains why every young enough Quincy survives a point-blank impact of the light, losing in this way the ability to perform ball standing and being condemned to receive an early death due to them starting to develop a silver clock in their hearts. Later in this video, we're gonna see an example that will consolidate this last statement, and that's thanks to Ryu's mother, whom despite being young, she suffered from weak health, and even with her condition, she perishes 3 months after being hit by the light of Dios Valen, and not on the spot. Before we go all the way to the last point of the video, I wanna talk about Gerald Valkyrie and Yugram and how the Holy Selection treats them at the end of the story. Alright, if we recall what has been established before, the thing that determines if a Quincy is going to perish when being hit by the light is the life collected by the Ausvalen. So, in Gerald's case, the light kills him instantly and gets rid of all of his skin, only leaving his bones. And this situation is exactly the same as Roberta Coutron's. Therefore, Kubo is telling us that Gerald is actually an elderly being, and that's totally correct, because in volume 72, chapter 656, we found out that Gerald is actually the heart of the Soul King, and the Soul King is an ancient being. His birth dates back to a time where Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living didn't even exist as such, and the only existing thing was a single world where the concept of death didn't even exist. So, in Gerald's case, it makes sense why the light kills him instantly and only leaves his bones. Now, in Yugram's case, it's a bit more difficult to understand. In this case, the light leaves him quite weak, but he doesn't perish. And probably, Yugram and Busby share a pretty similar vitality, because they are around the same age, but he may perfectly be a bit weaker than Busby, and all the Quincy's who survived to a direct impact from the light look pretty damaged. Therefore, we can assume they as well are knocked out in the place where they received the light for a while. Cause all the Shinigami that were around those Quincy's who were hit by the light retired from the battlefield thanks to an order made by Ohara to help create a gate to access the Royal Palace. And when those Shinigami arrived at the meeting point, none of them mentioned being persecuted or having any problem with any Stern Ritter on their way there. The only one is Umaeda, which mentions escaping from Busby thanks to Shinji's Sanpakuto abilities, but he's making reference to something occurring in chapter 581, and at this point the Holy Selection wasn't even activated yet. So, if the Stern Ritter didn't go after the Shinigami when they retired, it means the Stern Ritter were knocked out in a very weak state by the Ausvalen, just as weak as we see them for the last time until they eventually appear in the story later on. And when they show up again, even Mayuri is surprised to see Giselle alive. So the thing is, Busby, Nanana, Giselle and Lil Toto have time to rest to recover from losing vitality caused by the Holy Selection, cause they come back with the Shinigamis after the story has already continued with the events of the arc, like the death of the Soul King or Aizen's appearance outside the Muken. But despite those Quincy's showing up again, we can see all of them pretty damaged. So even though they have had some time to stand up again, we can assume his health is still pretty weak. So, as we can see, Yugram follows the same path as them for now. It gets more complicated when Yugram tells Uryu to transfer all of his wounds to his body, cause he's going to die soon and it doesn't make the difference whether he has some more wounds or not. It's likely to interpret those words literally and assume that Yugram is going to die in a few minutes. But after analyzing Yugram mentality on a video, which is already out on the channel, and if you want to know more about him you should check it out, my understanding of this action and those words are quite different. Let me explain. Yugram just fulfilled his long-awaited wish of being of use to Yhwach, and once he accomplishes this wish, Yugram shows his true colors, showing us he feels regretful due to killing Busby and taking the decision of staying with Yhwach when he was a kid without being firmly sure. For this reason, Yugram tells Uryu to transfer their wounds to him, cause that's what Uryu needs to do if he wants to follow his path and save her friends. Therefore, at least for me, when Jugram says he's going to die soon to Uryu, he's making reference to the silver cloud developing in his heart, after being hit by the light of Deus Valen, since this silver cloud will kill him soon regardless of whether he wants to live or not. Cause if we remember, the light of the Holy Selection only kills immediately the most elderly Quincy's since they obviously have less vitality. And Jugram didn't die when he was hit by the light, but he knows his death is set to take place pretty soon due to the silver cloud. However, Uryu knows what happens when a Quincy survives the direct impact of the light thanks to his mother's case, and knows that even though those Quincy's are destined to have an early death due to the silver cloud, they can still hope to stay alive for a short amount of time until his early death arrives. That's why Uryu doesn't want to transfer all of his wounds to Jugram, cause this will mean taking all of his remaining time left, since Jugram's health is pretty weak right now and receiving those wounds from Uryu will cause his death. That's the reason why Uryu looks at Jugram with confusion and discomfort in his eyes and answers Jugram's proposal saying, "I don't know, what are you saying?" in the Spanish translation, or "What are you saying?" in the English translation. But Jugram understands Uryu's stance and he convinces him to sacrifice him in order to let him follow his path. And I also think Jugram decides to sacrifice himself because he doesn't have any current purpose to live, since the only thing left for him is to wait till his early death arrives, and helping Uryu now is his way of trying to redeem his actions and decisions before he dies. Lastly, Uryu understands Jugram's decision and transfers his wounds to him, which leads to Jugram's death due to combining those wounds with his weak health. Therefore, at my own criteria, how Deus Valen acts upon Jugram and Geralt is not an inconsistency by Kubo, and I think the Holy Selection actually acts as intended in both cases. With this out of the way, there's only one case where it is explicitly said why this character survives an Deus Valen. That character is Uryu Ishida, who on a 17th of June survives a Holy Selection performed by Yhwach. This selection had the peculiarity of taking life and strength from every half-blood Quincy and from those who were considered impure by Yhwach, like Ichigo's mother, cause his soul was mixed with a hollow soul, thus causing the death of Ichigo's mother and Uryu's mother. It's worth mentioning the fact that Masaki died mere instants after she was hit by the light of Deus Valen, cause she was fighting Grand Fissure, and when she loses vitality alongside his strength and thus his powers, results in Grand Fissure being able to hurt Masaki till she dies. After all, in a proper fight, as Isshin says to Ichigo, she should have been able to defeat Grand Fissure without suffering any scratch, due to his innate powers and abilities as a pure-blood Quincy. On the other hand, Uryu's mother died 3 months after she was hit by the light of the Holy Selection, due to the development of a silver cloth in her heart caused by Deus Valen, as Isshin tells us. I clarify this cause from this example, Kubo is telling us how the Holy Selection works, cause if Kanae died 3 months after being hit by the light due to the silver cloth, even though she was young but had already a fragile health, it means any young enough Quincy can survive being hit by the light, which doesn't imply they will survive the Holy Selection, cause they are destined to suffer an early death due to the development of a silver cloth in their hearts, clarifying even more the fact that Busby and Nanana can survive a direct impact from the light. Now going back to Uryu, Kubo doesn't tell us directly why he survives a Holy Selection. We know Uryu possesses something even greater than Yhwach's powers due to him being the only Quincy in all of history to survive an Deus Valen, as Yhwach stated, so I can only think of one way to explain why. Kubo does imply that the antithesis of Uryu is what allows him to survive a Holy Selection, cause this Holy Letter consists of taking everything occurring between 2 instances and reverse it completely, thus making possible the fact of reversing the development of a silver cloth or reversing that instance where Uryu was hit by the light. However, to make this a plausible possibility, we need to take into account the fact that the abilities of a Quincy's Rift aren't granted just by Yhwach, and actually depends on the experiences and personalities of every Quincy, as we see with the Shinigami and their Zanpakuto abilities. Cause every time we know about the past of a Sten Ritter, their Shrift powers are related to their own experiences and who they are. Some examples are Asnod with the Fear, Yugram with the Balance, or Basby with the Heat. Then, if we take a look into Uryu's life, we can find some events occurring completely inverse to Yhwach's actions, thus explaining why Uryu's antithesis can negate events by inverting them, making this ability the only counter to Yhwach's Almighty. Those resemblances between Yhwach and Uryu come from a Reddit post by a user known as Trevi. So, if you want to know everything about those resemblances, I've linked his Reddit post in the description of the video. I recommend you check out this post and some of the other ones, cause he comes with some interesting thoughts about the series. Now, going into the resemblances, some examples are: the two of them have a peculiar relationship with their fathers. Yhwach proclaims as the first Quincy, while Uryu proclaims himself as the last surviving Quincy. Yhwach gets his full powers after stabbing the Soul King in the chest, while Uryu gets his powers back after being shot in the chest by his father. The Soul King, as well as Uryu's grandfather, were grotesquely disfigured by the Soul Society. Uryu and Yhwach lost their battle to fulfill their revenge against Soul Society, with Mayuri and Yamamoto respectively, but the Ryoka invasion was a success, while Yhwach's first invasion was a failure. Yhwach fights Ichibei, a false servant of the Soul King, due to what the nobles of the Soul Society did to the Soul King, and Yhwach turned the battle in his favor by using his Shrift the Almighty, which he couldn't use earlier due to certain limitations, while Uryu battles Yugram, a loyal servant of Yhwach, and he turned the battle in his favor by using his Shrift Antithesis as well, which he couldn't use earlier due to the limitations of using this ability effectively on Yugram. However, Yhwach wins his battle, but Ichibei revives, while Uryu loses his battle, but Yugram dies. And finally, Uryu absorbs the Reiryoku or spiritual pressure of Ichigo in an attempt to save his life, while Yhwach attempts to kill Ichigo by absorbing his powers. As we can see, those experiences and events will justify Uryu's Shrift abilities and why he has the same letter as Yhwach, and at the same time is the perfect counter to the Almighty. To wrap up the video, I think the Osvalen is well explained, but if you read some unofficial translations, or even some official translations which are a bit confusing or pretty ambiguous in some instances, it's quite possible you wouldn't fully understand how the Holy Selection works. Therefore, when you contrast some events where the Osvalen takes an important role, it's quite probable that you will end up thinking some of those events seem to lack logic and sense. But knowing what the Holy Selection really does, which is a distribution of strength and life as energy, and we contrast and understand all the examples Kubo gave us in the story, all of those events, which seem impossible, start to make sense. Hope you liked the video, but most importantly, I hope I clarified to you all of your doubts about the Holy Selection. In reality, this video was part of another video about the end of Bleach, which I've been working on for a while, to explain and give some more context about what happens with Yhwach, Uryu and Ryuken at the end of the story, and thus I considered explaining and resolving some misconceptions about the Osvalen in a proper video, cause there were lots of things to talk about this subject on their own. With that said, I'm going to continue working on the video about the Bleach finale as well as on a video about Hell, due to Kubo releasing a new chapter recently, and I'm so excited to talk about this realm and all the things to come in the future for Bleach. If you like this content, I appreciate your support by giving a thumbs up, subscribing and clicking the notification bell, cause I'll be posting some Bleach content soon. If you wanna see the progress of those videos, you can go to my Twitter, which is in the description of the video, and be informed of the more recent updates about it. Have a nice day, and I see you soon. Bye!